Everyone, welcome Don Norman. My library is full of Don Norman, design of everyday things, emotional design, living with complexity, the invisible computer. And today, right, his newest book, right, designed for a better world. Don, that's what we're going to talk about, although you can go back, to any of your other monographs or works that you want to refer to, right? You're a prolific author. Where are you today? Are you in San Diego?
I'm in San Diego. Speaking of retirement, I've retired 5 times, and so it doesn't stick. But the advantage of retirement is actually that I don't have a boss. So I'm extremely busy, but it's all the things I'm doing are things I like to do, like this thing today. And yes, I now live in a retirement home, but it's a very nice one. We have our own house, actually. And in fact, in my new book, I start out by saying, looking out that window, literally, I mean, it's the window just to my left. And I began to realize almost everything I saw was artificial. That, yeah, we have grass and we have hummingbirds and we have hawks and we have all sorts of animals, rabbits, coyotes, and palm trees. But I see in the distance Mission Bay, which is a recreational area, and I see the city of San Diego, and I see the mountains in Mexico, and it's all artificial. The mountains are real, but the notion of Mexico is an artificial concept. And the grass, well, I'm on a steep hill, so they had to plow this and make it flat. And then they had to plant things. Even the palm trees were planted. And the reason the animals, which are natural, are here is because we gave them this wonderful habitat for them to live in. Mm-hmm. And, I notice we have people who come around and pull out all the weeds all the time and kill the pest gophers. And I'm saying, wait a minute, animals are animals. And we define them to be the ones we like, animals, and the ones we don't like, pests, and the plants we like, plants. And the ones we don't like, weeds. And I began to realize everything. And I started learning about the history of the world and why we got to where we were, etc. I can go on for an hour, but I won't. But it's living here and what I'm doing, which is what led to that book, as well as, by the way, all the uprising in the world and what Black Lives Matter, about gender equality, about discrimination and biases. Boy, that's what changed this book into something very different than anything I've ever done before.
Well, it is. It's a different, it's a larger frame, I would say, than you have.
Absolutely.
That you have taken on here. I summarized the book, perhaps you wouldn't agree, but I just summarized this as design in its current form is limited in scope, yet is asking better questions, right? For the challenges that we have. And then you're trying to describe perhaps what are the directions the design could go to solve some of the problems that design got us into. Is that a good summary?
Yes, and when we say that, then what design got us into, it's been over tens or even hundreds of thousands of years that design got us into this. So it
Right.
Isn't the professional design profession,
right?
But we design laws and we design the notion of countries and so on. But I make the point, I think designers is a discipline that is optimally poised to actually be of assistance here, but not the way designers are trained today. Mm-hmm. A lot of designers are different because they've learned themselves and they've expanded their own views, but the normal training is as a craft. Mm-hmm. And designers seldom rise to positions of authority in universities or in companies or in the world, but you have to be in a position of authority to make the changes I talk about. Mm-hmm. So why don't designers rise? Well, you can ask me that later.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say that this is potentially it's a cultural phenomenon, and not in the way that you wrote about per se, but you've done work in Asia, and you know that there are design teams that report directly into the chairman's office in Asia, which is not the case here, right? So there are variations of access and how much the profession is necessarily honored as a problem solving or a way to, deliver value, right? To
In
variety
the
of organizations.
companies where this happens,
Mhm.
it's still in the aim of increasing the profit.
Agreed. Yeah, so it has that narrow scope, but again, you're talking about, generally access, right? And so again, you're trying to expand the frame. You moved from humans, centered to humanity centered as one of the core ideas that you're trying to express. Yet the more that I read, the more that it seemed that what you were actually trying to describe, like looking out your window, is the Anthropocene, that the humanness of the era that we're in, how it's changed the world is, do you need to set an even larger frame than human to actually do the work that you're proposing? I think we might need to think beyond human.
Kevin, you're a wonderful reader of the book. Thank you.
I did. I read it.
No, but the lessons you're learning from it are maybe even beyond what I hope people would learn from it. So great. Yes, the word humanity rather than human is meant to reveal this expanded scope. Now, lots of people have complained that, oh, humanity isn't enough. You got to cover it, Earth-centered or whatever. People offer other choices, and I say, come on, look, I wanted to say centered design, and then I had to use one word for the adjective. And no matter what word I would choose, it wouldn't cover everything. So I chose humanity. Actually, I discovered that it was already out in the literature for at least 20 years, although not widely known. I chose humanity and then defined it to include all the issues that you're talking about. So in my book, I talk a lot about economics, for example. Why is that? And I talk about politics. Why is that? Because they're absolutely essential. It's just as you said, for designers to succeed, if we're going to do societal benefit projects, we need the politician support and we need the economic support, because economists rule the world with their inhumane policies and models. They don't understand people, but they put them in their models. Very logical, sensible people, which is not how people are.
I mean, that goes to what you were talking about. There are things that you can measure, and there are things that are important that are not immediately measurable, right?
Yeah.
In fact, are you familiar with Joe Pine and Jim Gilmore's experience economy model?
I know Joe Pine, and yes, I know
he's on my board. And so my corollary is that as you move from those commodities, product, services up through experiences and transformations, is that the more valuable something is, the more inherently immeasurable it is, right? Because, as you get up toward experiences and transformations, the quantitative measurements start to evaporate, but you qualitatively want the outcomes, right? That are given. So but you can go to the newspaper and figure out exactly what gold or pork bellies or those things that are commoditized, exactly what they're worth, right, at any moment during the day. I remember having dinner with you and Julie in Palo Alto, and you said, I'm going to paraphrase. You were talking about when you were at Northwestern and you had a mixture of students. And you said, well, here's the difference, right? That the business students that wandered into the class wanted all the answers, right? But I kind of like the engineering students and some of the other disciplines better because they were asking all the questions, right? And, possibly one of the things that you're also suggesting is we have answers that actually don't work anymore, right? So asking for the answers, the best practices, aren't necessarily the ones that are a good fit for the current situation. Is that also, something that would comport with your writing?
Yeah, so slight change about the Northwestern.
Okay, please. Okay, go ahead.
It isn't business students who wandered into my class. I was teaching the MBA students because we had a joint program with engineering to get they would end up with a degree in design and an MBA in business. And I was voted in the first. They told me I was the worst teacher they ever had. Why is that? Because I encourage discussions And they said, we don't want to hear from our stupid co-students. We want to hear from the professor. And these students were marvelous. Their backgrounds were absolutely incredible. And almost any company I wanted to talk about, there was someone in the class who had been in that company and knew more about it, therefore, than I did. And the other thing is that I didn't give them the PowerPoint slides beforehand. And I didn't tell them it was going to be on the exam. And I tried to tell them, no, I don't use slides, first of all. And second of all, there is no exam. There's going to be a final project. They hated the course. And then the next year and the year after, as they graduated, they asked if I would be on their advisory board of the company they were starting. And they started to tell me about the wonderful class I taught. And I said, huh? Are you talking about the class I taught? Because what I did was so different. Here's what my engineering faculty would say. I hate teaching business school students because my normal students, they want to know the reasons behind things. They want to know why this is so. And the MBIs know. What they want to know is, what should I do?
And, you know, there are advocates in this group about doing, right? As you learn, you will probably get exposed to that as we segue into Q&A in a little while.
Well, then let me just make one thing.
Yeah, please do.
I want to hear from everybody else, not just for me, but I'm actually, with a bunch of friends behind me, I'm starting a new award program, and they wanted to call the Don Norman Award. So it's a Don Norman Design Award and Conference program. But the important point is, what we are going to reward is not designers. We're going to reward accomplishments. We're going to reward early career people, because senior people don't need another reward. But young people, and it's what they do that matters, because I'm tired of designers doing beautiful designs that never get done, or if they get done, they don't work. And so it's what you accomplish and what you do that matters.
Well, I think that you're going to get some people supporting that in a moment. Let me just turn for a moment, because having published myself, all right, I know that you probably turned in this manuscript, what, last fall, in the winter time, right, for it to be published here early in 2003. When did you lay the manuscript down?
Oh, wow. It took a year to a year and a half from when I submitted it to when it got published. And it was actually delayed for another 3 months because I didn't want to release it over the Christmas season.
All right, so that is exactly what I'm going to ask you. So now you've been kind of watching this phenomenon of generative AI manifest after you put the book to bed,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so you start off with artificial. So here's the preeminent new artificial on the planet, right? Not that it's all that new, it's been around for a while, but popular, all right? Is this artificial something new and potentially useful, or is this the people as objects, servants of machines that you write about? Where are you on what you're observing right now?
Well, I've been writing about this issue for a long time. In fact, I used to publish in the AI journals. And it, neural networks were, the first development was in my laboratory when we had started the cognitive science group. We got some postdocs in, and my colleague, David Remmelhard, and I were teaching the postdocs about the work we were doing, and I was giving a lecture on perceptrons when one of the postdocs stood up and said I was completely wrong. I love when that happens. And went to the board and told me what was going on in England. His name was Jeffrey Hinton. And those of you who follow the AI stuff know that he's considered the godfather of deep learning. And so he and Dave Remmelhard started to work, and they invented this, that a perceptron was one layer of cells. So they said, we need 2 layers. And they said, no, we need 3, an in-between hidden layer, they call it. That was the breakthrough. But it really was very weak and powerful and not much. And later on, much later, like 15 years later, I met Jeff at Google, where they had bought his company. That's where he worked. And I said, what was the theoretical breakthrough that got you to deep learning? And he said, nothing. The point is that the computers of today are 1,000,000 times more powerful than the ones we had. And but the problem is it's still pattern recognition. It has no understanding whatsoever, none. And so I think it's a very powerful mechanism. It's going to make designers better. It's going to make many other people better. But we have to change the way we work, and we have to change the way we use things. And it's going to make education better, by the way. All these teachers worried about, oh, people are going to turn in stuff generated by this system. Yeah, well, that means that you're asking people for the wrong things. You're examining them in the wrong ways. And I've always been in favor of cheating. And I've told people that you want to encourage people to cheat and borrow from other people. It's only cheating because you have to lie about it. And I say, if I copy from another student's paper, I say, this is where it came from. Because that's how authors write books. We take our ideas from all over. What we do differently is the way we put them together. And we don't train students to do that. We don't train students to work in groups, which is how everything gets done in the world, except in universities. And so I'm in favor of the new work. And yes, it's very flawed, but it's been out 6 months. Come on. It's going to take a decade before we really truly know how to take real great advantage of it.
Right, very good. So we're half an hour into a dialogue, and we're going to go and open up the conversation to others. I'll jump in from time to time. I want to introduce you to Schneider Alfonso. Schneider is monitoring this, and the chat, which is our tradition, the questions are in the chat session, and we'll call on some folks. Schneider, are you there?
Yes, and we have at least four.
Yeah,
we have at least 4 questions.
Yeah, so
Yes.
we're going to go first, Schneider, to Mei Lin, because
Sure.
Don, you may remember Mei Lin from, she's the co-founder along with Surf of PCI, and has been a Hasso-Plattner Institute fellow recently. So she's been swimming in some stuff, right? Mei Lin, join us.
Don, it's really good to see you, and I'm looking forward to reading the book, which I have not read yet. When you say humanity-centered design, we called it people-centered. So originally, I went to Vint Cerf and I said, we need an internet of the people, by the people, and for the people. And he said, Mei Lin, that's too long. We'll call it the people-centered internet. So that's how we got named. But my question was actually about the informal economy. I don't know if you touch on that, but that's one of the things that we at the People-Centered Internet are starting to bring attention to, and we're working with the US Census Bureau to look at how the informal economy could be measured in the 2040 census, because it's just how long it takes to get things into the census. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about the informal economy. I came into it because I really realized it was very hard for women to talk about things and to participate in society when the informal economy, which is what we women often do. We do it for love, not necessarily for money. And so many things that we do in society are not counted. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Thank you for asking that wonderful question. And I hadn't thought about it properly because I should have included it in my discussion. It fits exactly in what I'm worried about, is that the economists rule, and the economists only care about things they can measure, and they almost always measure it in monetary terms. And so the informal economy, which is where a tremendous amount of activity takes place, well, we can't measure it. After all, if you're a housewife, and I'm using that term deliberately but there are house husbands too, but anyway, they don't get paid, right? And so, well, that doesn't contribute to the economy by their definitions of contribute. And I think that the way that they are measuring things is absolutely wrong. The gross domestic product is something I attacked severely because it counts only spending, and that's why the informal economy is left out. But it also counts spending for evil as equal to spending for good, because it's how much money flows that's important to economists. And so, yes, because so much good work gets done by people who are not paid, by volunteers, by interns, by people, by spouses, by significant others, by people banding together, by neighborhood volunteer groups. that take over, and that a lot of the healthcare and help of the homeless people today is done that in ways that are not counted because it's done by volunteers in the informal economy or by bartering, trading. You know, I grow these vegetables and you make these objects, and so I'll trade one for the other. But there's no money passing, so it doesn't count. You're absolutely right.
Don, one of the things that I like to, in terms of GDP, is like to tell people, it's like going to a restaurant, right? And GDP only describes the back of the house where the food is made. It does not describe the front of the house where it's served and the experience is taking place. I said, you go to a really good restaurant for both, right? And the experience doesn't get measured, right? But yet you wouldn't go there unless you had both good food and a great experience. So
Actually, people sometimes go despite the food because of the
yeah, and there's actually a study recently that said that restaurants that have the best views have the worst food. And so they started a TV program, to show, well, we're going to go fix that. Right. And so they get to go to all these great places, right? I don't know where, I've never seen it before, but somebody described it to me. So. All right.
Right.
Snyder, who's our next
Yeah. Now
person
we
with a
go
question
with
for
Ben.
Don? Or a comment?
Yeah, Ben. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, this is Ben. I just wanted to comment on the notion of moving to the service exchange notion. Other measures than value exchange, or at least valuing service as a sort of a macro issue. How do we get a simple principles that operate under different complexities? That's where you get the notion of ephemeral. That I might have ephemeral economies that we use that term informal, but they're really local. They're local in time and local in place, and that we allow nested logic in them as well. So when we're talking about what's artificial, it may be temporary, and it may serve a time, serve a community, and that it creates an opportunity for new measures of service value exchange rather than looking at remuneration.
I agree that the problem is that we have, again, because of the measurement, because of this false dictum that if you can't measure it, you don't understand it. So what I want to emphasize is quality of life. And I think we have to basically overthrow the existing economic system. That's not going to be easy. But we have to change it. So we're really looking at quality of life, which is what really matters, not about how much money you have. In fact, the evidence shows the more money you have, often the less happy you are. So yeah, let's throw away numerical measures of money and look at what really matters to people.
And one last thing is, one of the most interesting things about our time, and certainly for myself coming from computer science, that we've never let the current challenges of complexity stand in the way. And we're able to tolerate extraordinary complexity going forward, and we have and demonstrated continuously now that we can ask questions that we never felt we could ask in the past, and tolerate incorporation and address of quality of life in ways that we felt were only constrained by our historic measures and metrics. And those no longer should constrain us.
Right. But by the way, the psychology community has long been measuring all sorts of things that are thought to be unmeasurable. And because there are different kinds of measurement scales, and they can be very powerful. You know, one of the quotes which I read after I finished the book, but I would have had it in the book had I read it earlier. Danny Kahneman, my good friend, I've known him since he was a graduate student, which is a bit before he won the Nobel Prize. He said, nobody ever did anything because of the numbers. They do it because of the story. And I have made that as a major point of a lot of what I tell people, because I tell them how executives make decisions. they sit around this big table and the staff sits around the uncomfortable chairs. And someone comes in and makes a presentation with spreadsheets and they show the increased sales and increased profits. And then they go out of the room and the executives say, well, I don't know. And they talk about this. And then someone says, you know, my daughter came home and she told me that, and she tells a story, which is relevant, by the way. And it's a combination of the story plus the numbers that make the decisions. We don't take enough account of people's subjective experiences. But actually in the boardroom, when no one's looking or listening or recording, that's what people do.
Almost every time that I presented research in the enterprise context is we would do qualitative research of some type. We would have some recordings, right? We would form it into better questions and then quantify it, right, through some large scale experiment. But then to tell what happened, we had to go back and take the snippets of the qualitative research that were examples of what we found in the quantitative, because that's where the stories were, right? Is it had to be put back into the mouth of somebody saying, right, and expressing that value. And it's so standard, but people don't recognize it.
The executives want the numbers, but numbers are abstractions. You no longer
100%.
know what they're really talking about. The story puts it into a particular context. Now, stories are flawed because each story is one example, and maybe you're trying to sell to 1 million people. So it can be dangerous to use just stories. It's the combination that's powerful.
Yeah, agreed. Schneider, who's next?
Thank you, Ben. Now we pass to Mark Prinsky.
Mark, join us.
Thank you. Hi, Don. We met at FIRE, I think, a long time ago. I thank you for, I just very much agree with some of the things that you just said, particularly around accomplishment. And I'm trying to move the world from thinking about that kids need to learn to they need to learn to accomplish. And that's really the crusade that I'm on with this thing. And I'd love to hook up externally around that with what you're thinking these days. The question I keep asking is, can we have an accomplishment-based, call it an education or upbringing for young people where they don't have to sit in school and just learn in advance for 6, 12, 20 years, but they're actually doing things in the real world during those times and acquiring whatever they need through that process, with a coached process, obviously. And so I'm trying to set that up as calling it empowerment hubs. And I hope we can talk about that. The interesting thing about Danny Kahneman, let me just close on this because you mentioned it. So the question of stories has always interested me. And from Danny's perspective, is that a bug or a feature? In other words, he says a lot of things that we do, and we all do them, and we know we all do them, are just not really that beneficial. And I wonder whether the idea of our need to focus on a specific individual story in case my daughter did this, as you described, is in fact, partially at least, a bug.
Yes. Anyway, thank you, Mark. It's always fun to talk to you, and we are in agreement. So I'll come back to that in a second. Yes, stories. Look, any given measurement, and a story in some sense is a measurement, has its issues. It has its positive feature. As I said, it gives you a context in which which you might use for your decision. But it's a limited one, it's just one, and you can therefore pick a really negative one if you wanted to. Or you pick one that's really extraneous and it's really irrelevant if you needed to, and you may not even be aware of that. But the same is true with measurements, that you can measure thousands and thousands of people. But I like to ask people, you know, when you fill out a questionnaire, do you trust the answers you give? Almost everybody says no. They asked me to give these answers. None of them are what I really thought. And so why do you trust the results? So, but let me get back to what I think is your most important point, which is the educational system. I think that the educational systems of the world are flawed, fundamentally flawed, because we teach each subject in isolation and we teach them out of context. So people, why am I learning all this? What's the reason for it? And so I'm a big fan of teaching in projects where you say, here's something we want to do. We're going to build this garden outside the classroom, or we're going to go out and examine this, or we're going to go visit a factory or whatever, but we're going to do something that's real. Now, the problem with apprenticeships is that what they're going to learn depends upon what the company needs at the moment where their people are working. So I do think in the beginning, what we do is we start with carefully crafted tasks, but the task and the project is something that it should interest everyone. And if you can't find one, we'll have 2 or 3 tasks and people can choose. And so we divide the class up, but you've put them together in such a way that they're going to learn the concepts you'd like them to learn. And what I like to do in my teaching is I tell the class, here's the first project. I do this on day 1. And I ask them to go solve this problem and then come back and report, divide up into groups and come back and report. And I do this before I've taught them the skills they need to solve it. And that's so that when they come back and they are all mixed up and they have really weird answers and so on, then I can teach them the skills because now they understand why they need them. So that's one of the great things about project-based education is you now have the background to understand why you have to read what would otherwise be boring stuff, but you read it now and you say, yeah, oh, I see, I know it. And you go back to that project and do better. So it's exactly this, it's my version of what you have been saying all along, Mark.
We have a lot to talk about. If you put your email in the chat, I will send you some stuff and we can set up some ways to do that.
Ooh, put it in the chat where everybody will send me some stuff. I can't.
Or I'll put mine in the chat and you can just write to me. How about that?
Okay.
All right, that's fantastic.
Great.
Mark, you do that and we'll, Don will, at his convenience, interact.
Thank you.
Schneider, who's next?
Yeah, so we have some comments from Mike and Matthew. So Matthew, if you would like to share your comments with all of us.
Sure. I mean, the stuff that I wrote, I don't know that I have to reread that, but the thing that was coming to mind was Gregory Bateson in terms of the story as feature versus bug. The thing that's coming to mind was Gregory Bateson's comments about in any complex adaptive system, we end up developing sort of shortcuts, right, for how to make sense of the world that work well enough. And because they work well enough, they're very efficient, right? We rely on them until they start to shoot us in the foot. And that there's just sort of, as part of how living systems evolve, there's always this tendency to end up with overestimating how well we understand the world around us, I guess would be the way to frame it, right? There's always some larger context where something about our environment that we've been operating in has been staying pretty consistent, so consistent that it became invisible to us. But that was not the truth for all time and space. And suddenly things change and life gets tough. So that was sort of what was bubbling up for me. The comments that I'd written had to do with the Metacurrency Project, which is a group that I volunteered with for a long time. And just along the lines of the economics points that were getting made. Yeah, we think economics needs a pretty significant rewrite. And we think about currencies as basically, if you broke the word into 2 parts, current and C. So currencies enable flows of activity to be made visible. So we would think of like heart rate as a currency, right? It's something that enables us to distill down into shorter language some process that's been occurring. And so there's a wide variety of currencies, including things like nominal currencies, right? Doctor is something that summarizes a whole bunch of activity that happened, went through the school stuff, graduated, maybe if it's a medical doctor, you pass some tests, etc. And but it's not a measurable one, right? It's not quantifiable in the same way that some of the other things like dollar amounts in a bank are. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Those are just some of the comments.
Thanks, Matthew. Did you have a question for Don, or would just those leave us with those comments?
I guess if Don is aware of any thinking or useful directions related to and we're makers, we're doers, we're people who are trying to redesign the architecture of the internet to enable different patterns of coordination and economic activity. If he's familiar with some other paths that we might go, we've been pursuing this currency one, but if there's other things that seem like they might be fruitful to go explore.
Well, I think what you're talking about is ways of measuring or accounting for the invisible or informal economy. But let me talk about the very first point you made, which is that, because it's an important part of my book, which I say that we're limited in our ability to understand these extremely complex systems that comprise the world. And we tend to simplify. So our notion of causality, for example, is very simple. We assume that the causality means there's a single cause and it has an almost immediate result. And it's very difficult to understand that there are multiple causes. And second of all, that the result might be decades later. It's like trying to tell you, don't to your own children, don't get sunburned, don't go out in the sun because you'll get cancer many years later. The same with smoking cigarettes. It makes me feel good and powerful, whatever, but no. And so, first of all, we think in linear terms, and we can accept one feedback loop, so we can sort of understand how a thermostat works in your house, although people still don't. When you come into a really cold house and you want to get it warm, what you do is you turn the thermostat up to maximum, because that'll get you the house warmer faster, right? No, it doesn't work that way. But the systems are really difficult, so we make simplifications. And they are necessary because there's no way that we could, in fact, nobody and no person for that matter, even the most powerful computer systems do not understand the system that we call Earth. So simplification is necessary, and most of the time it's good enough. We have many heuristics that make us smart is the name of a wonderful book that says there are simplifications, but they work most of the time. And that's how we get through life. And occasionally when they fail, it could be a disaster, but they mostly work. And that's actually why we keep using them.
Very good. Who is next?
So we have one more question from Mark. Mark, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I left my hand up. But that led me to some interesting thinking, which is a paradigm change really the kind that Kuhn describes? Is that really a change in our heuristics? Is that really when we suddenly say, well, we used to think that getting a degree in school would lead to a higher salary over your lifetime, but guess what? The world has changed, things are different, and we can't use that heuristic perhaps anymore. So because I'm increasingly seeing science as teasing out all those complex cause and effect things that we're thinking about that are, as you say, far too complex to really understand completely, except in simple cases. And so we have to have the right heuristics, and the heuristics have to fit the time and the environment that we're in. So maybe what we're doing here, all of us, is inventing new heuristics.
Oh, absolutely. I believe we are in a paradigm shift, and I'm hoping to help make that paradigm shift. And historically, every time this goes, that people's fundamental beliefs often have to be changed. And those are heuristics. And yes, they must be changed. But there's the notion, for example, that you have to go to college in order to have a higher salary, et cetera, et cetera. That is wrong in two ways. First of all, the school you go to often does not determine the final salary. But second of all, wait a minute. Why does how much money you make be the most important thing? That's not what's most important. And as we know, a lot of my MBA students go off to be consultants because that's the highest paying job you can get when you first graduate. And guess what? They hate it.
Mhm.
So what is it? Why is it we're after money when that's not what really people care about? It's, once again, quality of life.
I went to BCG and hated it, but learned a lot.
So, now you said that there weren't any other hands, but I'm gonna call on people because I know there's some folks who have, thoughts that clearly relate, right, in this area. Gary Bowles, are you with us? Don't know whether he's at his mic, maybe.
I
There.
am. I'm
Hey.
just about to get back to the screen. Hang on a
Great.
second. So sorry.
Hey, Gary,
Yeah,
meet
timing.
Don Norman. Gary is the author of Next Rules of Work. I'm sure you have some thinking that relates to the conversation we've been having, or at least the thesis that Don's putting forward. What do you think? What's your question?
Don, how you doing? It's been a long time.
Hi.
Great to see you. So Don, one of the things that my group Shred has been involved in over the years is focusing on wicked problems. So we've tried to tilt at really big windmills, future of work, the future of education, the growing gap between haves and have-nots, and we've approached that through sort of three legs of the stool. Content, so we try to bring attention through writing and videos and that sort of thing. My lectures, convening, so we try to bring people together to be able to bridge across silos, and then consortia and ways for them to be able to do take collective action together. And sort of the example that we often use is there's an event called SOCAP, Social Capital Markets, that we co-founded that today brings 4,000 or 5,000 people together every year. We don't run it anymore, but the whole idea was to be able to help people to see the design of existing systems and then to be able to co-create the design of future systems. And so when you talk about moving to humanity-centric design, what's that operating system look like to you? You have a group of people often operating in different silos, and there's this, I agree with you, we're at a stunning period of shift in our world, and you see a collective challenge, and you want to use the thinking of Don Norman to help a group of humans to be able to agree on the problem that they see, to agree on the kind of action that they should take. What does that operating system look like? And I apologize, I haven't seen the book yet, but I'm looking forward to digesting it. But what's the perspective? How would Don wave his magic wand and have a group of humans from disparate arenas come together to be able to agree on the problems that they need to solve and to focus their actions collectively?
In many ways, I'm not sure it's going to look that much different, although I think it will be a major transformation. But my main thing is that if we start thinking more globally about what the actions are that we're doing, a simple one to look at is climate change. It's simple because we're starting to understand all the parameters, but it's unbelievably difficult because I was just reading in this morning's Washington Post about how difficult it is. Europe is starting to shift away from climate change action because, well, we're losing money and it's not good for the economy and so on and so forth, despite the fact that we're really suffering the results of what's happening today. And but what I'm saying is that my switch from human-centered design, where we try to make products that are really easy for people to understand and use and functional and all that, there's nothing wrong with that, except that we completely ignored the impact on the environment in mining to get the materials and the way we manufactured it and spit out fumes into the air and water and land. And well, the fact that, well, we want people to rebuy again and again and again, so we make them small and we make them wonderful, and you can't open them up and reuse it. You can't repair them, and so we can't open it up to reuse the components, so we throw it away into the landfill where it poisons the air. It really does. And so the same mechanisms that we use for today's life could work but with a different value system. The value system being not just how much money we make, but rather how much good we are doing and for, again, a good life. Now, companies who rely upon continual selling of devices, consumables, we call them, they would have to change their business model, because we can't rely on always selling you a new cell phone every 2 or 3 years. But there are lots of models that we could use, and most of them come back to the service economy. We're going to offer you services. But that's sort of my model. It's that I can go on and on, but that's the direction in which I think things will have to change. But it isn't that people wouldn't recognize the world afterwards, but the value systems would be very different.
No, absolutely. I mean, we found certainly with a number of our initiatives. But first off, and I think you're exactly right. You have to show people. I mean, Silicon Valley likes to call these negative externalities, as if the the pollution and the social ills were not their problem. So you really do need people to understand the ecosystem that they're affecting, and but then they also need to have different framing for the value, and I think that's the thread through so much of the discussion up until now is we've designed a set of systems that are anchored in our thinking about economics that at the very least is creaky and ancient, and at the very worst is antithetical to broad benevolence for human life. And so the helping people to understand different framing, but then to understand how they need to act differently and how their actions have tremendous repercussions throughout the ecosystem is critical, because otherwise we bungee cord back to the way we did things before. Europe, which was the leader in so many ways on impact capital, on environmental issues, there's a bunch of patient shareholders out there that are just waiting to be able to say, you can't run a business like that. You can't be profitable like that, because they keep on focusing on, the near-term quarterly share price.
Yeah.
Oh, that we have to change that short-term viewpoint, because again, in this world of business, long-term thinking means talking about the quarter after the next one. That's easy.
Sometimes we bake expectations into the language, right? We talked about economics. In accounting, we refer to anything that's been, identified yet not extracted from the earth as a wasting asset, right? It means that unless you extract it, it's a waste. Well, that principle baked into accounting, probably we need to change that language, right?
Well, we have a perfect example of that, Kevin, today, which is the real estate that businesses have invested in. It's not that that's the way you would design having a massive headquarters and having people have horrible commutes and forcing them to go into cubicles every day ever made any sense for humans. It's the sunk cost of those investments.
Right.
It's that unused real estate that is essentially a drag on the bottom line of corporations. And if they had designed for humanity-centric organizations from the beginning, you would never have built the corporate headquarters. It just didn't, it never made sense.
But to be fair, you couldn't have gotten, you sort of needed it in the early days, because it's the same model of manufacturing, where we had to bring everybody together to manufacture the devices. So we're treating our people as machines and putting them in the same place, because you needed to have better communication among them. But today, because of the new technologies like we're using right this very minute, you don't have to be in the same building. You can have really good discussions and good work with being at a distance. But that wasn't true earlier. So, I have some sympathy for the way things developed. It seemed natural. That's the whole point about artificial things, because we grow up with it. We are born with it. We live with it. And so it all seems natural. Or what you mean there's some other way? But today we know there is some other way.
I mean, even as you point out, artificiality, time is artificial, right? We created it. We created the calendar.
Worse than that, the physicists defined what time meant.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not what it is psychologically.
Yeah, exactly. And I just want to point out, the first hour is our normal hour, and we go into overtime for half an hour for additional questions. For those of you who need to leave, we really thank you for joining us for our discussion and conversation with Don Norman today. So I see Kat or Vak from the, are you, hey, how are you? All right, she is in at the Quality of Life Lab in, are you in Geneva?
Hello, everybody. I am leader of Quality of Life Technologies Lab. I'm a computer scientist. I'm currently at Stanford, at the Stanford Medical Center, visiting for summer.
Okay, there you go.
Yep.
I thought you might find this interesting. You should ask Don a question.
I have so many questions, and from a perspective of modeling, we're struggling with a modeling of this unfolding and evolving and changing people's behaviors, which then are influencing their quality of life. Or on one hand, the behaviors are influencing the quality of life. On the other hand, the behaviors are expression of their quality of life. So we have this very challenging task of modeling. So we're trying to understand how do we capture, ideally passively, different aspects of daily life. And then we use the mixed methods, which I've mentioned before. So we do a lot of talking, and then we ground the new variables, and then we go into this personalized models. It's a lot of work, and in many cases I'm sometimes thinking like, what did I do? Why did I went into this domain? And there are moments when I'm like, no, it's so much to be done. It's go on, and we have to do that. And recently, so I came here for specific project, which is really very challenging, and I already started to work in this domain. It's a sexual health aspect and the contribution to quality of life. So I'm going to conduct the studies in which there will be mixed method approach. We're collecting the passively assessed data from perspective of behaviors related to sexual health, and including the use of mobile apps, and there will be wearables and other data sources, and there will be a lot of qualitative data in which we are going to ground the new variables. So I just wanted to say I'm really a fan of your work. Thank you very much. And I am in this domain, and there are moments when I'm a bit frustrated, and there are moments I'm like, no, it's good. And even if it's just a small research project in 4 weeks, so like a snapshot of some of the quality of life, and then we do some modeling and we have yet another paper, then I keep going. So thank you.
Thank you, Kat. We're glad that you're at Stanford. All right, keep here with us for a period of time. Make sure you get over to the D school.
Oh yes, of course. Thank you.
All right,
just arrived.
Kevin,
Yes.
actually, we have Mei-Ling that would like to do an introduction, or just for Kat. From
Okay.
Mei-Ling.
I was actually just wanting to introduce Katie Wack because, Don had talked about the importance of quality of life. And so I will actually ask a question. Quality of life was really a big thing about 15 years ago. The Canadians were doing a huge amount of it. And then it seemed, at least from my point of view, petered out. I was glad to meet Katie, who has the Quality of Life Lab. You earlier talked about the importance of maybe quality of life as an alternative measurement for GDP. And where do you see it? What's the state of the art right now in that sort of trajectory that you perhaps might be looking for, Don?
Well, I don't want just quality of life to be one of the measurements. So the GDP, one of the problems with it, let's just assume it's not even a bad measure. The problem is it takes many different variables and many different components of our economy and world and lumps it into one number. And so I've been a fan of the work that's done by the Donut Economics Group in Oxford, where instead of giving you a number, they give you a dashboard, right? So the donut, it has two components. One of them is what your country or company is doing for the economy. I'm sorry, for the ecological system. Are you increasing or decreasing carbon dioxide or methane or nitrogen? Do you have clean water? Do you have clean air? Do you, et cetera, et cetera? And then they show basically a very simple set of graphs to show you whether you're doing well or doing badly on this. And then they have a second ring, which is why it's a donut. It has two rings. is that now let's take a look at the societal issues like good healthcare and education and clean water and food and housing and so on. And again, what it allows you to do is what a good company CEO would do. You come in and you look at this dashboard and you say, what are the issues that I must attend to carefully? So the dashboard signals where things are going well and where things are not going well, and ideally where things that were going well are starting to deteriorate. So you ought to take some action before it goes bad. Now, the dashboard like that doesn't give you enough information, but it signifies the important issues. And then, of course, you then pass it on. You explore the ones you care about in more depth to understand what was going on underneath it. And each one of those might have its own donut to tell you what the important issues are. A quality of life is very important, but it's a result of many, many independent variables. And so what I like is this is a way of displaying in a meaningful way those independent variables that matter.
Excellent. Did that answer your question, Malin? Excellent. There are some other folks we have not heard from. Let me just ask Schneider. Schneider, have we had any questions from Valerie, Pari, or Gopi? Or Barry? I don't know if you can. So I'm going to call on.
Not really.
Have you seen any?
Yeah, not really at the moment.
Okay. Well, Gopi just came off of mute. Do you have a question, Gopi, for Don?
Yeah, it's a very quick question. Dan, thanks for joining the call. It's very enlightening to listen to you. Looking forward to read the book. The question is, you talked about some of the reward programs that you're envisioning for the young people, and more in terms of what their achievement is. So I'm trying to understand, what's the shift for that reason, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the program itself, and if there's something I could read about and understand that. That's a question.
Well, it's because I was trying to think about the ways that I could contribute to what's going on. And in fact, in writing the book, there are lots and lots of issues where I had opinions, but I didn't think it was necessary for me to state them because there are really good people working on all these issues. And so I tried to pick only the issues where I had some unique knowledge or background, because I've been an academic in several fields: electrical engineering, psychology, cognitive science, design. And I've been an industry executive, vice president of Apple and all that stuff. And I've taught business school students, and I'm friends with some of the major behavioral economists. And I said, I'm not going to say anything that's new. What I'm going to do is give it a different foundation, a different perspective. Well, when my friend said, oh, gee, you're 87 years old, we ought to do something in your honor. And they wanted to say, well, award people who are doing great work. Well, no, I've gotten awards for my work, and it's nice, it really is, but it doesn't change what I'm doing. But when you're very young, just starting out, that's where the change makes a big difference. Mm-hmm. And sometimes if you get money, that's nice, but actually it's the award itself that is what is inspirational. And so I decided to do it in an area that I care about, societal needs. And we're going to, and how do you define those? Those are, well, the easiest way is start with the United Nations SDGs, 17 of them. Actually 16, but number 17 is we must all band together in order to do the 16. And but we're going to, and I wanted to, so I have a group of people, but I'm now starting to enlarge it. I need to get people, well, maybe like you, Gopi, to be my advisors and jurors and help frame this properly. We're trying to raise money, and we have a bit of money, which is allow us to, I want to make this international. We're going to start off with focus on the Tijuana, San Diego region for two reasons. One, it's local. And by the way, the problems we face here are the same problems all over the world. And we have an especially difficult problem, which is common too, which is the immigration problem and the border problem. And also, in part because some of the efforts that I made, San Diego and Tijuana is the world design capital for the year 2024. issued by the World Design Organization that said, no, you're not allowed to do that. It's got to be a single city. And we said, no, it's going to be the area. And so I want to really get a cadre of people together who are trying to change the world by their accomplishments. And so for me, the award is only a part of it. I really want a joining conference where I bring together people from across the world who are working on this so they can talk about the lessons they've learned and pass on their knowledge to other groups. And one of the things I'm going to insist is that I don't want people to tell me about their wonderful successes. I want a number of people to tell me about their failures, because I believe firmly we learn more from failures than from successes.
You know, Richard Saul Werman, who I used to work with when, when
Ricky.
TED was a new program, right? He is really, despondent about the fact that TED, he's an architect, didn't meet his architectural expectations. He said, oh no, it's become a bunch of 12-minute videos, all right? And he said, I wanted to put short spectacles on stage that during long breaks and meals, people would have conversations, right? It's very much in keeping with your guidelines for, I don't want to give you a presentation. I want to have a conversation, right? And you're kind of re-sparking what he wanted to do in this new context, Don, right? Is you want to bring people together so they'll share with each other, as opposed to, having some homily from stage, right?
That's
Although
right.
I think that the expansion of the TEDx, where it's all over the world,
Mhm.
has done some good, and there are some really wonderful short pieces.
Mhm.
You're right, a lot of them are not, but it's a good educational tool in many
Well,
ways.
I'm only expressing what he said, right? I mean, I think that a lot of people
I know
benefit
what-
from
I
those
know.
videos, right? But at the same time, his design was spark conversations, right? Sharing. Right?
Yeah, except I know, and I agree with you, but let's remember that he used to do this in very expensive locations with very expensive costs and for
Yes.
the people.
That's true. It had an elitist tone to it. Maylin, your hand is back up.
Yes, I wanted to talk about something that I was involved with that might be perhaps informative for this idea of the kind of working out how to get young people to talk about their accomplishments. So I was involved with I was a judge for 4 years for something called HOSA, the Health Occupation Students of America. And it was middle schoolers up to college students. It was young people, and it worked at the school level, the district level, the state level, national level, then international level. But what was so interesting for me is that the top 3 from every school would go to the district. And then suddenly the whole school would be behind those top 3 and cheering them on and fine-tuning their whatever. And then, and I remember a teacher who was involved with this, and she was from Muskogee, Oklahoma. And she said, those 3 kids from my high school, they had their life changed by this. They had never gone out of Muskogee before, but they got to the district level, they got to the state level, and they got to the nationals. And suddenly Muskogee was on the map. It was so important for them. And that was such a wonderful experience to see the excitement of the young people. It was kind of almost like an Olympics that made the whole country and state and school go behind the team. It was really, really very inspiring for me. And I just wanted to share how that happened. And then we, within the People-Centered Internet, where the 2024 is, in fact, the 50th anniversary of the internet, the TCP/IP spec. And so Gopi is one of the people at Google who's working with Vint and I to work out Google's involvement in the 50th anniversary. So I do encourage that Gopi and Don talk so that perhaps we could have some overlap between all of these significant events happening in 2024.
Thanks, May. In fact, I was about to quote our conversation last week about you seeded me some very interesting thought about, how can we connect the diaspora community in the Valley or to the origins of where they belong and come from, and definitely conversations around young people is even more sparking. Definitely.
So let me give out a,
Gopi, put your email into chat so that Don can contact you, because that's what he prefers. Go ahead, Don.
yeah, but I'm gonna put out to everybody an email, which is this, it's the Norman Design Award thing, and it's called Norman Award .design. That's the URL for the website.
Okay.
Norman Award .design. And actually, if you fill in the form for that, it will get to me eventually. I'm not the head of this organization. I said, no, I can't be the head, but yeah, so Gopi, we should talk, absolutely.
A question as we're getting up to
And
the
this
top.
other thing, by the way, I think that no, I'm in the chat. Let me go back. I was reading the transcript, so I lost it. But the rewarding the top people who are doing healthcare in high school and so on, and letting them, having the whole school behind them. What is so wonderful about that is the only place that really happens today is in sports.
Hmm.
And it's so nice to get away from sports and athletics and these contests to something that is actually meaningful for the world. So
Yeah.
Thank you for that story.
Yep.
For the work you did to make it possible.
So Don, I have a question. I don't know that when I read the book, I may have missed this, but help me just unpack it if I did miss it. Or biomimicry, right? Are there already patterns, for the taking that nature provides that we simply haven't observed or interpreted correctly that would, get us kind of kickstarted in the direction that you're suggesting? I don't know what you think about biomimicry as a discipline.
Well, actually, this is the book. And when the book first came out, I'm holding it this way on purpose.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how big it was. And
the other ones are considerably thinner.
Considerably thinner, yes. And so when people ask me, how come I didn't cover this, that, or the other? Well, gee, there's a lot of things I didn't talk. I deliberately actually did not talk about biomimicry, but actually you can see it in many of the things that I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in sustainability, I'm a big fan of the circular economy. Now, the circular economy is fundamentally biomimicry. It's trying to repeat what nature does, but basically nature doesn't waste anything. And when living things die, well, guess what? We reuse all of their parts, which becomes fertilizer or other things for future nature. And so,
do you agree with the McDonough view, the cradle to cradle view, which is another way of expressing circular economy, that you have to design it for its next use and the first use?
Yes, I believe the cradle to cradle use was actually the inspiration for the circular economy. It's the same philosophy in some sense up to date.
Okay.
And yeah, that destroyed the thought I had.
I'm sorry.
So yes, here. One of the things I talk about is architecture. And that we know we have, because of HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, so effective and so powerful, but uses a huge amount of energy, which is almost always fossil based. We build buildings with no concern about where it sits in nature. And so back to biomimicry, animals do very well about nests and all sorts of living habitats, which keeps the temperature fairly stable. The old times we used to make homes out of clay and earth, and for that matter, cow shit in Africa, and it's cow dung, if you like, and it's very effective. And because it's thick and warm, and so it keeps the heat in the winter and keeps it cool in the summer. And there's another technique which I discovered while writing the book when a young student wrote to me and said, "What about this? Wind towers, where you build a building so that, and this is done in the Middle East a lot and in India, so that the heat comes in the bottom and goes up a tower in the middle, which causes a nice breeze throughout the entire building." And so there are different ways of mimicking nature, if you will, and making use of nature without all this artificial stuff we have. And the wind tunnel doesn't require any power. And so it's just designing things appropriately. And so, yes, I am a fan of it, but I didn't talk about it because I can't talk about everything.
Yeah, understood. I was just, so you've answered the question, asked and answered. Ben has his hands up, and Mark, I don't know whether you still have your hand up or whether you have a
I
new
do.
question. All right, so Ben, then Mark, and then we're going to wrap up. Ben?
Yeah, a quick thought as you're talking about your new study that you're going at, reflecting on what are elements of your personal journey. But when we look at one of the most remarkable meetings I went to was one about 40 years ago. They're called CSCW, Computer Supported Cooperative Work.
Yes.
And we brought together psychologists, computer scientists, and business people. And it was like the dance scene in West Side Story. They all went into their separate corners and were happy to talk with each other. And by the end, we got everyone talking to each other, and they each changed each other's world. And they left with questions and challenges that they were willing to share. And so I'm sort of envisioning your opportunity as starting with the West Side Story, folks in a corner, and ending up with changing each other's world, sort of as you have done in your journey from engineering to different psychology and perspectives that you've done individually for yourself as well. That it's a unique opportunity to really shake up everything.
Yeah, the early days of CSCW meetings were wonderful, computer support of collaborative work. But some of my friends, my cynical friends, said, these are academics who've never lived in never had a real work experience, because it's not collaborative, it's competitive. And which is actually true of academics as well, by the way.
All right. Mark, you have the final question that I'm going to ask Mei-Lin for some closing remarks, and then we'll wrap up. Mark?
Two quick things. First, I support Mei-Lin. A great example of that is First Robotics, where they have found a methodology to get this incredible enthusiasm going on the part of young people. And the second, going back to Kevin's remark about wasted resources, the most wasted resource that we have in the world is our young people. We totally waste all their imagination, energy, capability by sticking them in school and thinking they have to spend all these years learning in advance. So that's why I'm so enthusiastic about what you're talking about, Don. I hope there's work we can do together. And the young people of the world, starting as young as the cradle, will do very good things, I think, in the future once we unleash them.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
And I still have your email. I've copied it down here. And but yeah, I think the First Robotics is a really great example of things that we can do where people are competing in positive ways, competing. And the other thing about the First Robotics is a competition, but afterwards you're you share your ideas and the things that you've learned so that other teams can advance. And that's one of the more powerful things. You combine the competition, which is good for getting people, focusing and working hard. But then you have the sharing afterwards, which is the powerful part.
And now if they could only build their robots to do positive things for the world instead of shooting hoops, we would be even better.
Yeah, a lot of these contests are, can this robot, your robot, kill the other robots?
Yes.
That's not how FIRST robotics works, but still.
All right, very good. I'm going to invite Mei Lin. Do you have any closing thoughts as we wrap up today, and thank Don for being with us?
You know, sometimes people ask me, why is the PCI community call on a Sunday morning? And it actually is like the equivalent of church for us people who are the people-centered community. And I truly feel that we have heard from one of the masters of people-centeredness, humanity-centeredness, Don Norman, today. And we're very grateful, and we hope you will come again.
Thank you, Maylin. By the way, this group of people, I've given lots of podcasts and lots of discussions, and this is fantastic because of you, because of your expertise and your general knowledge, so that it's really, I love this. This is what I learned. So thank all of you. Thank you, Kevin, for being the host.
Well, thank you for being an occasional interactor. All right, when the time is right. All right, it's been really a honor and a delight to know you, and I'm glad that you could share time with us today. I'm glad that I could put your new book on top of my list, right? Because I said, I've got to read this before I do this interview, all right, and have this conversation with Don, and it was worthwhile. I mean, to say that the qualitative advance that you made from your earlier books into this one was striking, all right? And so that was also very rewarding. So congratulations. And I will be in touch with you about what you're doing on your new gathering and your awards program. It's quite interesting. And if you can gather together a group that is as engaging as, I've found PCI to be, then wow, all right, you're going to be onto something that would be worth spending time with. So,
well, maybe
that's my friend.
PCI should be one of our partners or something. Yes.
Oh, Maylin is nodding her head. All right, so you should take that as a good sign. And Schneider, thank you very much for helping host today. Great work. You're now about to enjoy a great meal in Porto. All right, so enjoy that. And Don, have a great morning. Best to Julie and to all the things that you're about to do. Everyone, thanks for joining us, and everything you do, be intentional. Cheers.